for being here. I am very excited to talk to you all about suicide prevention in the LGBTQ community. Here's the thing. So I've been working in suicide prevention officially since about 2016. And part of my role when I was responsible for the VA's program for the Pacific Basin, I was a suicide prevention program manager for the VA out there, and we covered a huge territory. I had from Hawaii, 6 hours by flight to the south, touching American Samoa, and then 6 hours to the west for like Guam and the Micronesian Islands and things like that. And what I found was that when I go into these places and I'm talking about suicide, I was a lot more comfortable with this topic than people around me, including the clinicians, including, some of the community members and things like that. And so what I thought was, I want to share with people what makes me comfortable talking about it, And so part of it was, how do we understand suicide and what do we believe we can do about it? Are a couple of the ideas I want to share with you all today. And so, I didn't get there yet, but I'm a lesbian. Just want to share that. And so I care about my queer community, right? And so it's also something of an issue within this community. And so it's a natural thing to kind of talk about and share. So that's kind of like why I'm excited to be here and some of the things I want to share. But we'll get into it. Disclaimer, I do a lot of things around the way, I'm out there in these streets. But what I'm talking about today is from me, my opinions only. All right. So I just want to say, any organization that you may know I'm affiliated with or any grant funder or corporation, these ideas are TRR Peterkin from Phoenix and Thrive. I'm not representing anyone else. I can talk to you about some things, but I'm not in any official capacity. So let's be clear about that before we move forward. Keep me being cool with my friends, All right. So I had a little introduction. I appreciate that. Just a little bit more about who I am. I'm not going to go into all of it. It's there if you want to read it. I think you may get slides. I don't know. But here's what's important. This is not some theory that I'm sharing. I didn't read some statistics and we're just going to talk about it. I come to you guys as a clinician. Okay. So I started when I always say the professional world. I always want to say officially because I want to be clear about the work and stuff like that. But anyway, I started working with homeless individuals. Individuals struggling with homelessness is how I like to describe them. And that's direct care work, is in the trenches work, is dealing with all aspects of that individual's life. And I just want you to think about, just taking a second to think about the things that lead people into those circumstances, right? So we're dealing with folks that may have experienced financial insecurity that led to losing, their housing situation, physical abuse, common thing, physical sexual abuse. We're talking about trauma. We're talking about people that are struggling with maybe substance use, maybe issues with their mental wellness. And what I loved about that work was that it allowed me to kind of touch on everything. So it wasn't like I was just looking at, okay, how do I help people with let's just pick something out of the air, trauma. How do I help people overcome trauma? And then I think about the interventions for that. And then I get real focused. It wasn't that. I had to show up every day with a little bit of knowing who's going to show up and how to help different folks from different backgrounds. That's where my heart kind of starts with the homeless population. It's not on here, but I was also in the Peace Corps. And when I was in the Peace Corps, I did that in Costa Rica. My work there was with homeless street kids, as they describe them. And so that's really where it started. And then, it took me on. Right. So that's the homelessness background. I made the pivot into suicide prevention out of need. So when you work at the VA, which is something I used to do for direct care stuff, you kind of just go where you need to be. You go where you need to be. If there's not staff, you go there, whatever. So I was detailed to the suicide prevention program and realized, wow, this is another situation where I get to touch a little bit of everything, because there's not one cause, so to say, for folks that end up feeling suicidal, right? And so I went into that kind of just like with no real history, in suicide prevention, but kind of thrown in, and then eventually covering that territory. And I came to feel like, hey, I love this. I love that it's something different every day. I love that I need to know, how to meet people, how to engage people, and then how are we going to help them overcome what they're going through. So that's a little bit of my background clinically. where I'm coming from. I like to share with people I'm from Philly, okay? So thank you very much. Appreciate you. Appreciate you. What does that mean for you? It means I talk fast, okay? And I also talk with my hands, okay? So if I need to change that, you let me know and we'll adapt and overcome. That's what we'll do. So yeah, I'm from Philly. And then, you know, the other thing is when I talk about the clinical background and like maybe some of the training and stuff, I'm pretty open about the fact I didn't just learn this in school, guys. You know what I mean? I have real life experience with having to figure out how to survive my life, you know? And so some of the things I do share with folks is I had the experience of growing up without my own biological parents, you know, and I had to kind of deal with that. I had the experience of being the only gay person in my family, having to deal with that, right? And then ending up as the first person to go to college in my family and having to deal with that, you know? And that was kind of a trip because I was really excited. I thought people would be happy for me and my family. I got into an Ivy League school. This is kind of a big deal for a lot of people, you know, did not care at all. You know, it's kind of like, okay, you're going to go get your piece of paper and then what? And so that was the whole thing, right? So it's just like figuring out how to navigate all of that. And Philly as the background is important because inner city Philadelphia can be a jungle. All right. So I won't call it the Wild Wild West, but you have to figure out how to survive. So that's kind of where I come from and who I am standing here sharing all this information with you guys today. All right. So some of us in this room, you know, we're probably used to sensitive content, but for folks that might be listening to the recording or just to remind us as people, all right, you might feel a kind of way, some type of way about what you hear, and that's all right. It might be a thought you didn't want to think about. It might be a memory you weren't planning on having right now. It might be your stomach starts hurting. So whatever experience you have in your body, your mind, your thoughts, if it comes up, please feel free to just step away. That's cool. We all can take a break. And come back if you feel like that's the right thing for you, you know? And when you do take a break, if you want to talk to somebody, you can text 741-741. My favorite resource to tell people about. Because you jump on your phone, you start texting with a crisis counselor, you're good. You know, or not that you're good, but you have that access right away. All right, so a couple resources just to say this might get touchy. All right. So what are we going to talk about today? And I do want you guys, if you guys have questions or anything like that, let me know. I want this to be as engaging as possible. And like, if there's something not here that you want to talk about, we can do that too, you know? So, all right, my goal here is just to, help you make sure folks understand the impact of suicide within the LGBTQ community. Obviously, it's a thing. I think it's what people talk about. You'll see how I handle that today. And then really gain knowledge of the conceptual frameworks for understanding suicidality. I think as we understand what leads people to feel suicidal and kind of what maintains the environment for suicide, we can become more comfortable with helping folks navigate that territory for real. And then how to apply some specific strengths from the LGBT community as like a method of suicide prevention. Like let that be the risk mitigation strategy. Like one thing I've learned in my own life and that I like to share with the clients I'm seeing is we have everything within us that we already need to survive and thrive. We already have that. So it's a matter of like figuring out what those strengths are, nurturing them, and then leveraging them. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that as well. All right. How are we going to get there? This is our plan. So we're going to start by defining the LGBTQ community. I hope to do that in a way that you're not expecting. So get ready. All right. We are going to talk a little bit about, some statistics that I know if I'm going to do this presentation, I have to discuss. I'm more of a positive kind of person. I stay on that side of the lane. I don't like to go there, but we're going to go there a little bit today, just cause. And then we'll get into suicidality, and then talk about LGBTQ strengths as suicide prevention, and then finish with just maintaining mental health wellness. So that's the plan for how we're going to go today. Feel free to we can spend more time wherever we need to. You guys let me know. All right. So defining the community. I'm starting with Audre Lorde. All right, because she kind of informs a lot of my work, and my existence, and just speaks to my personhood. So we're going to start here. And so I'll just read the quote so I don't mess it up. But if I didn't define myself for myself, I'd be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive. Damn. That's the importance of really defining yourself. All right, so like if you think about how the world feels about the LGBTQ community, you might get, a couple ideas that are not aligned with your internal ideas. Let's just put it that way. And it's important to take action on addressing that. Okay, and so let that be like, this is that important. No one wants to be eaten alive, right? Like that's like, I think it sparks something in folks. And if you don't identify with like the creative part of that and just like the poetic side of it that I do, there's actual therapies out there too, narrative therapy, you can go into your theories and stuff like that. It's a real thing. And I like to kind of talk about narrative therapy because it also informs my work, but it's not just like, hey, I'm a basketball player, or hey, I'm a basketball fan, or I like watches. It's not just like defining yourself like that. It's also like, what does it mean? Like, oh, I didn't play basketball in college because why, right? And that why that we tell ourselves about what happened and how it happened is really important about how we then go about navigating our lives. So keep that in mind as we think about how we're going to define the LGBTQ community. So now this is probably what you were expecting, right? Lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer question. Okay. The LGBTQ community stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, and questioning folks. No, and I'm only kind of joking about it because I think when I say, hey, I'm gonna define it, this is what everyone's expecting, right? And these are some of the letters. I call it my favorite alphabet soup. These are some of them. But when you think about what Audre Lorde was talking about, right, and what I just mentioned about the definitions we find about ourselves, I want us to go beyond what it means. But like, what do these acronyms, what do these letters represent? Who are they representing? And so when I think about defining this community, I like to start with like pre-colonial contact. All right. I like to go back before someone said it was wrong to be gay, and figure out what was going on. How were these individuals kind of experienced in their own communities, right? And this is not something like, I think Native American Two-Spirit, that's something that you're a little bit in touch with, a little bit of this work you might have heard about, you know what I'm saying? But it's not just here. It's all throughout the world, which I think is also empowering to know that we exist all throughout the world, right? And so I have some examples from India, Philippines, and Africa, Mexico, Polynesian culture. Mahu, the Polynesian stuff is kind of close to me just because I spent almost 4 years out there and kind of touched personally by those communities. And so I put this out here to say, okay, folks have existed in their own way for a while before someone said it was wrong. But like, who were these people in their communities also? Let's talk about what they did. So like some of their roles, it wasn't like, oh, we're going to go underground or have like a black market community or have to hide or, pretend this club isn't for gay people. It wasn't that, right? It was other things, spiritual meditation, skilled in crafts. These folks were people that you relied on. They became the leaders in their society because it was special to have two energies inside of you and not be, now see, I almost said something pejorative. So I was going to say stuck in one, but you know what? I'm not judging. I'm not judging anybody. Okay. For the folks on the recording, we love everybody. I really do. But you have access to different energies. Okay. And that's important, right? But name giving, feared warriors. And so I didn't put this up there, but when you think about what does it mean to have, like, let's say two spirits, or what does it mean to represent something in the queer domain, as I'm talking about it here, we're talking about folks that were born with anatomy that didn't necessarily align with the social norms of the gender that they were expressing. Okay, and so the feared warriors part, I just want to go right there because these were folks that may have been born with female anatomy and may have, you might thought would present as a woman in the world, but that wasn't the case. They were more in touch with their masculine energy and became not just a good fighter and could do everything the boys could do. I'm not going to say like that, but chiefs. Okay, like we got to get together a plan. We're going to go to this warrior to figure that out. One of the things that when we think about how we even get all this information, I started pre-colonial because I think that's important. But what happened at that time when colonizers made contact, one of the things that happened, we trust these individuals. So these are the individuals they're sending for negotiations these are the individuals that colonizers are writing about in their own way. And so then they represent, colonizers will then represent this group of people in a way that's negative, weird, different, inappropriate, all those things, and let's move to squash it out. They're the first people they want to kill, right? So now there's this move that we have to take these individuals and protect them and hide them in our own societies. That's a real thing that happened. So when we think about, we could know so much more about I like to call them two-spirit individuals, pre-colonial time. We could know so much more, but a lot of our information is through colonizers, number one, and then there's oral tradition, so things are lost. All right, so this is probably the lowest recognition we can provide them. But whenever I see that, I think, oh, maybe 10 times more. All right, so I want you guys to sit with that as well. So when we think about, okay, all you know, where we come from, the things that are inside of us, this is our history, these are like our ancestral backgrounds. I summed it up with this. We're incredibly special people, okay? Folks that have been historically respected, folks that have been relied upon. I talked about accessing both energies. So we're talking about insightful people. If you want to like think about it as just like someone having a lot of perspectives, okay? Someone that's lived in a lot of worlds. So when you go to another world and you have experience from, you know, maybe a different place, that informs how you act in that place, and that makes your perspective stronger and more dynamic. All right. Courageous folks, really authentic, aware of self. It's hard to be different. Let's just say that, right? And then decide that you want to be different out loud. That takes real courage. You know, that's an important strength that we can't ignore. The part about acknowledging self is also important, because just think about, like, there's this whole thing about being in the closet, you know, and I say all this, but it is real, and, you know, it's a thing. There's a reason that folks are in that space, right? But you're in touch with yourself. You know that there's something going on with you. So just to have that awareness. There are folks that don't have enough awareness to know that they are in the closet, but that's another topic for another day. All right? We're not going to go there. We're just talking about the people that are out and working. All right? Creative, inspiring folks. I talked about like crafts and basket weaving and stuff like that, but you can just look around the world and see LGBTQ community, I would say queer community, is very creative, and I'll just leave it at that. We know what we got going on. But we're survivors, right? And so that's like the most important thing is, even with all the things happening in society over time, over generations of time, we're here, right? We continue, we exist. We haven't been like stomped out, or I could reference conversion therapy. I won't, but you know, we're here in spite of all the things. So these are some strengths of like this community. But when we go back to how do we define the community, this is what I'm talking about. I'm not just talking about the letters. I'm talking about all these characteristics in particular. All right. So we have all these sort of positive things going on. How do we get to suicide within this group of folks, right? I'm talking about a really inspiring population. Suicide is, I want to kind of set the stage, right? And kind of, when you think about suicide, I want you to think about the environment in which it exists, right? So we're talking about the things that are leading up to it, the things that make it possible. So starting with sectionality. Kimberly Crenshaw, a really cool person over at UCLA right now, but you guys should look her up if you don't know her. But the idea is we all have a lot of parts of ourselves, okay? I am Black. Maybe you see that. I am a woman. I am a lesbian. I am funny. You know, I'm all these things, and I can be impacted differently by depending on how people feel about those identities. Okay, somebody, I almost got distracted. Okay, I can be impacted differently how people feel about those identities. All right, and so that cumulative impact is really the idea about what we're talking about when we talk about intersectionality. All right, I bring that up because, well, I'm gonna go into it, but if you're a kid, it's bad enough being like maybe the smallest kid, you're gonna get bullied, but be the smallest kid and be gay, well, you're really in trouble. You know, so it's like, maybe it's okay that like I'm poor, for example, or I have low income, but let me have low income and be Black. Well, then I have another problem, right? So thinking about how all these things stack onto each other is important. The experience of other and feeling different can occur before you have words for it. All right. And that's important because you don't know what's going on inside of you. Now, this is something that I really want you to remember. All right. I grew up in Philly. Y'all know that already. But I started studying Spanish when I was 12, in 7th grade. All right. And it was just like a fun thing to do at the time, like whatever, you got to pick something. Okay. And then I eventually went to boarding school, and then you really had to pick something, and then I stayed with it. And the reason I liked it and the reason I stayed with it so hard was because I didn't have words for all the things going on in my head in Spanish. I just could like talk about food, how to get dressed, identify food, music, that was it. So it was like a real fun place. So I learned this new language of like, it was like beautiful. It rhymed all over the place. It's really fun. But that was like one of the things I consider my saving grace. I ended up studying in Spanish, majoring in Spanish in college. And I told you I did Peace Corps in Costa Rica and lived in Spain. That became a thing that became a part of me. But part of that was I didn't have words in that language to express the crap I was dealing with. So it's a real impact, and it's important to be mindful of that when we're looking at kids that are struggling, not just kids, people of low emotional intelligence struggling, they don't have words either. So it's really anyone, all right? And then another thing we're talking about setting the stage of what's going on with this community is like you develop your moral code before you know who you are, all right? And so like what's your moral code? Religion, for example. Let's just say you choose to follow that, right? Religion. Let's just say family values. Maybe street credibility, whatever it is, someone told you how to be before you knew what you were. So then one day you have this idea that you're different than the values you were told about. That's hard. All right. That's a conflict that this population in particular has to address. All right. So when you develop your moral code, before you develop who you are, and then who you are is in conflict with that, the internalized shame is the next thing that happens. All right, so you're going underground within yourself, and then we can, go back to the courageous folks, and we see how people navigate that. Some folks come out of that, and that's good, but that's a hurdle you have to overcome. Wow, I could talk about this forever, and I almost got distracted again, but I won't do that to you. Just keep that idea, work with it. Talk to me later, yeah. All right, so that's setting the stage, right? So then we're going to talk about, we got all that going on. Let's talk about what's happening. Now that you know kind of the stage we're working on, who are the characters, right? What's going on? There's bullying happening. We talked about it. And I could cite all these things and make this real crowded on the sheet and like give myself that credibility. But I didn't want to, because a couple things is I can speak to most of these things personally, and I can speak from that. I work with LGBTQ clients. These are the things we're talking about. Okay, so I can speak from that. These are real issues, right? So now we set the stage about just like, what makes it hard. But then you have all these events happening, okay? You might not be welcomed in your home, within your friends. You might be dealing with fighting all the time. Won't go into the neurobiology of that, but it affects you. Okay, cortisol is a real thing. Feeling like you're going to die is a real thing. It affects you. That's happening inside of an individual, okay? So they have to decide, like, how do I survive? How do I live with this? What does it mean that I have to deal with this? How do I make sense of all these things? So these are, some of the things that come with it. And then understanding the stage now, understanding some of the events, we get to the numbers, all right? We talk about what are the statistics, right? When folks are like, yeah, suicide prevention in the queer community is a problem. It is a real problem, I have up here, it's the second leading cause of death among individuals 10 to 24. The second leading cause they're killing themselves the most, That's really sad. It's one of the most heartbreaking statistics about this entire thing. I always start with it because it's so sad, But we talked a little bit about why, right? We set the stage. We know what people are going through. Now we know why this is a real problem. Queer youth are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their peers. We talked about it, right? Their peers are not always going through the things they are. Maybe their peers are not worrying about feeling different inside without the language to deal with that, right? Maybe their peers are not being physically abused to as motivation to be something different. You know, that's not something they're going through. There's a systematic review that shows 17% of lesbian, gay, and bisexual adults attempted suicide during their lifetime. 17.4%. And to compare with folks that don't identify with those groups, 2.4%, right? And it's not like if you're walking in the world, like let's say you go out in LA, you're like, okay, most people are gay, only 2.4 of them are straight. No, that's not really the case, right? So the representation there is a little skewed, right? And we talked about why. So something I'm doing intentionally is I want to talk about the trans numbers too, because let me make sure. Let's see, did I mess that up? I sure did. Oh, there we go. The Smith Institute, UCLA. Okay, they're here. They got a great thing going on. I think you need to check it out. It's in the references, but like it's one of the most it's just enlightening piece of work. You should check it out. But I want to talk about the trans numbers because when we talk about LGBTQ, that alphabet soup is super separate. Okay, people are interacted upon very differently, not just by the outside community, but also within that community. And the numbers for folks that are in the trans realm, they're worse for the rest of the alphabet soup, right? And when I think about my history as a queer person, I don't know that I would be right here without this group of people, you know? So it's important that we really respect like their contribution well, I like to respect their contribution to my survival, right? But then let's acknowledge what they're going through. All right. So this, in 2015, this U.S. transgender survey was most expansive, biggest study to look at transgender folks. You know, when you think about like, even on the previous slide, I said LGB, right? It's not because I forgot the rest of the letters. It's because when they're sampling for research, that's the way they're grouping people. And so, little sidebar, right? When we think about what we know in terms of knowledge, sometimes it's based on how the research is designed. And how do you outreach transfer folks to get them to trust you, to participate in a study with all their business where it's not going to go anywhere? You can, people have, but it is a thing. It's hard to do, right? And so we have to understand that the research isn't comprehensive. There's a lot more work to be done. And you spend a little time on maybe Google Scholar or whatever, you'll find that there is a lot of work happening. And that is encouraging. But just want to put that out there that sometimes they're left out. All right. Now, in this study, 82% of respondents reported ever thinking about suicide in their lifetime. If I just walked into a room and 8 out of the 10 people had thought about suicide in their life, I'd be like, wow, we got to do something about this room we're in, right? Like that's a high number. And then just in the previous year, 48% of folks had thought about it just that year. So that's a lot of people thinking about suicide. I don't have the Columbia up here about how do you screen for suicide and all that, okay? I will just take a little beat to say, when you're thinking about suicide, you know, there's a spectrum of like risk levels, right? Like thinking about it is awful and sad, right? It doesn't mean just because you're thinking about suicide, you want to do something about it, or that you have a plan, that you have intent, that you started to do things. So I encourage people to share that they're thinking about it, because it's like the sooner we can like intervene, the less aggressive the intervention has to be, right? It's okay to think about suicide. It sucks. It's probably because of something bad that's happening, but people do it. And I'd rather talk to someone when they're just thinking about it before they've gotten their plan and preparatory behaviors together. Okay, so that is a lot of people thinking about it, which is not great. But while it's up there, I do want to encourage us in our work, and for just folks that maybe it's friends, whatever it might be, do encourage people to talk about it. Okay, talking about it is not the worst part. Yes.
What kind of language do you use for people that are having these thoughts? Like, not necessarily a plan, but they don't want to live, to get them comfortable to discuss them.
All right, so I think it's okay. You know what I mean? You just really start there, because guess what? If my car just got totaled and now my partner broke up with me and I have a world of crap that's going on at work, I might think I'd rather not wake up tomorrow. I could have that thought, oh, it'd be so easy. Let me just go to sleep. If God don't wake me up, God don't wake me up. You know, that's okay. It's okay to be struggling and wanting out, right? So think about your outs. You got a lot of them. Maybe ending your life is an out for someone. Okay, cool. Let's think about some other outs, right? But I think the conversation you use is like, yeah, that's a real tough time, for real. You know, we can't tell people, oh, but it's not that bad. Oh, but you got kids you got to live for. Like, no, nobody needs to hear that. This is not a time to have like some sort of debate about how they should value their life or not, or whatever it might be. I'm going to talk a little bit later about, you know, sometimes people, they're not hurting themselves because they don't value their life. They're doing it as a sacrifice because they feel like a burden, right? So it's a weird assumption to say, let me give you all these reasons, you know? So I think, what's the language you use? You normalize that it's okay. That a lot of people, when they're depressed, for example, they think about how to end that depression. One of the, what do you call them? Not risk factors. Yeah, risk factor is actually relationship loss. When folks break up, it shifts their idea about who they are. Maybe they were going to get married. Maybe they were married. Maybe it's divorce after like 30 years, you know. Relationship stress is a huge risk factor. So when I'm doing an assessment, if someone just came in and they're telling me that they broke up with their partner, I want to know how they feel about that. You know, I want to dig into that a little bit because that's important. All that aside, it's important to normalize that you can feel however you want to feel. All feelings are valid, right? And with that, right, it's okay. I understand that's how you feel. Actually, a lot of people in that situation, think about that. Have you taken it one step further to think about how you might do it? So now we're going to find out if they have a plan. You know, because just because someone wants to die, like I said, they may not have that plan together. But if they do, that's okay too. And actually, us knowing what that plan is super helpful, because then you can have a real conversation about lethal means reduction. And we know, like, you know, there are some people in some camps in this presentation. I might mess up the time. I'm going to be good about it. But, you know, there are some camps that believe, you know, if someone wants to die, they're going to die. Something you can do about it. You know, you heard that. I mean, people hear that. I like to be clear, that's a myth. I'm not here to talk about the myths, but that's one of them. And it's not true because, like, for example, if I say I want to die, but I want it to be quick, right? I don't want no pain, nothing like that. So I decide that the best option for me, someone in my situation, might be to die by self-inflicted firearm injury, okay? And I share this with my friend. I share this with maybe my counselor, whomever. They're like, okay, well, let's get you a gun lock. You know, or I'm going to get you a gun lock, and you take the key, you put it in ice, put in some water, stick that in the freezer. So if you want to get that gun, you got to wait for that ice to melt. You got to get that key. You got to unlock it. You got to go through all that thought process. We have an opportunity to put time between impulse and action, and that's what we really want to do. Whatever the plan is, let's put time between impulse and action. All right? Now, the point of me saying I want to go easy and maybe not suffer is like, I'm not going to say, okay, you took my firearm away, or maybe my friend has the key or whatever, so I'm going to choose to go by jumping. Well, that's frightening to me. I'm going to talk about one of the theories of suicide. One of the things that make the environment possible is not being afraid to die. You know, so choosing the method is important because that's the way you've chosen, that you're comfortable, you're okay with that, right? So we want to ask someone, have you thought about how you might do it? You know, and just see where they are. Okay, you have? Okay. Have you done anything to start that plan or act on it? No, not yet. Okay. Well, you know, I'm sorry that you're feeling that way. You went so far to think about it. Let's talk about what it might look like. What kind of things can we put in place so that you reach for that plan as like a later option in your process? You know what I mean? So you walk them through it. It's helpful if you know the questions, you know? So I think, you know, sometimes we have our own little homework to do so that we're not sitting there trying to like check things off like, Do you want to die? Okay. Okay. When's the last time you tried it at all? Okay. Last 3 months. You don't want to do that. That doesn't feel good to anybody. It probably doesn't even feel good to you asking the questions that way, right? But if you know it and you can make it a conversation, you can let people know, like, I really care about you. And my job here, and I've told people, my job here is to protect you. And sometimes that might mean even against yourself. In one of my former roles, I was responsible for managing the crisis line consults. So, we have our 988, you dial it, you go to Suicide Prevention Lifeline, you press 1, you go to Veterans Side. In my job, if anyone called and that person lived in the Pacific Basin, then my team had to respond to those consults. And some of those people would end up on our caseload, we start working with them, and I would tell them, I'm here to protect you. Sometimes that's against you, but hey, you help me figure out how I can protect you against maybe your darker self. And partnering with individuals so that, you're getting to the goal. I think my hearts of hearts, I don't think most people are born wanting to die. So I don't approach them like that. I try to help them get back to what they see their life, like how they can thrive in their own lives, So that's how I would handle that. I think that's a good question. Any other questions or thoughts before I kind of move forward?
Raise your hand, I'll come over with the mic.
Oh. Am I speaking into the mic all right?
You are mic'd up.
Mic'd up. All right. Yeah. All right. So, back to our transgender friends. So I talked about people thinking about it. There's also a bunch of folks attempting. Okay. So, Lifetime, when they did that survey, it was around 40%. That 40% of transgender folks who took that survey had attempted suicide in their lives. And then just in the past year, it was around 7%. 98%, that's almost everybody. That's almost everyone that what was in the survey. 98% is high. You don't get 98% on nothing. Or anything, I should say. So people know I know my English. You don't get 90% on a lot of things. But, all right, 90% of these responders, of the ones who experienced 4 instances of discrimination and violence, in the past year thought about suicide. All right, now I can name 4 big things that have happened in this country this year, okay, that would qualify as discrimination. It's happening all the time, all over the place, right? So if you know someone, and as bleak as these statistics are, I think it is important for us to think like, okay, if I have a client or a person I care about, or I come to know someone, whatever it might be, and they fit some of these characteristics, then I might be moved to action. I might say, okay, you know what? You have a lot going on. I know that people in this situation, 40% of them have thought about suicide. Let me ask you how you're feeling. And maybe that's another way to have the conversation too, is to say, okay, you just lost your job and your wife left you. That's crazy. That's wild. You got to survive that. Sometimes when that happens to people, they think about ways to end their life or not want to be here anymore. Have you thought about hurting yourself? Putting some context around the question too can help. So one way to use some of the statistics that we're sharing, and access to gender affirming care is important. I mean, we could have just a presentation on that as well. But folks that do have that access have lower incidence of attempts and ideation, and so it's important to know it's not just people want to look different or be different. It's really important to their personhood. You know what I mean? So just wanted to make sure I mentioned that, and mind my time, y'all. Mind my time. All right. So we set the stage, I think, pretty good. We heard about the greatness within the queer community, which was the important part of the last section. I hope that's our take home. And then we heard about, some of the statistics that happen when other factors in the world get in the way of that. So let's start talking about what is going on with suicide. All right, this is where I feel most comfortable. And this is where I want you to feel most comfortable. Because I think it's like, you think about fire. You need a match. Well, I don't even know how to set a fire, but you need a match. You need a spark. You need a couple of things. You need oxygen, air. You need those things. If you take one of them away, you don't get the fire. Okay? And that's how I want us to think about suicide. You need a certain environment for it to happen. You take some of these things away, you're less likely to get that outcome. All right, so if we thought about that instead of like thinking about the person that wants to die and trying to get inside this person's head and persuade them and, you know, maybe bring them onto your side of whatever it is you think you believe, and that's a lot, okay? Let's just think about dismantling the environment that makes suicide possible. Now, there's a bunch of theories. People believe all kinds of things, all right? But they're categorized into three major groups of theories. Okay, there's one group of people that believe, all right, suicide risk, we call them the theories of suicide risk, okay? So it's like, you have a mental health illness, you're bipolar, so now you're going to be suicidal. All right, well, I say it like that because obviously I'm not in that camp, but it's a real thing, okay? It's a real thing that sometimes we have things going on with us psychologically that might make us justify hurting ourselves, okay? And these were the first theories in suicide. I want to say prevention, but in the suicide world. And as all theories go, they evolve when they fail to explain things. And that's what happened. You know, there were two people with bipolar. One person doesn't harm themselves, one person does. And how do you explain that this risk situation was the thing? You can't, right? So we go evolving, right? The next group of theories involve like sort of what you consider theories of the mind. Well, now we're looking at what's going on inside of that individual. What are their personal factors and beliefs that might lead them to harm themselves? I appreciate this camp. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it on the next slide. But we're moving from just like what disorder that we decide the DSM version 3, 4, 5, TR, whatever, and we know how great that is and how it's designed towards equally for all communities. We're going to go beyond the list of disorders there and add personal emotions and experience, right? So one important experience is if I've seen, if I grew up in a way where I've seen a lot of people die, my relationship with death may be different than someone who hasn't had that experience. Okay, and that's important because now I'm not, you know, most people, we don't think about death. Half people don't even have life insurance, and I'm not here to talk about life insurance, okay? That's not my lane, okay? But suffice to say, we're not thinking about death. We think we're going to live. We're chilling. We're planning lunch, planning parties. All right, some people don't live that experience. You know, some people lost their parents, for example. Some people lost their friends. They may even lost these folks to suicide. And so their idea of death is like, it's real and it's happening. So why don't I mean, I'm not going to say why don't I choose mine, but why don't I be aware of it so I'm prepared for it? And it's a different conversation. All right, so people's experience, that particular one, experiencing death is really important. It factors in to that group of, when that category of theories, it factors into how they understand the environment for suicide. Now we go a little further, and I like the ecological theories because they kind of take in culture. They take in the fact that, like, if I'm from the Latinx world and I'm a male and I'm not maybe as like macho as I'm supposed to be, that might be a problem for some people that believe in those traditional ideas. Okay, that might be more of a problem for that individual than it is for someone who's maybe comes from a background where that's not important, where you can just be who you are, just what you do is more important, what you achieve is more important, so you can shift, you can focus. People's cultural rules will impact how deep their shame is buried. And that's what's important about the ecological context. You know, that those theories take that into account. So we know that, like, you know, when we talk about statistics and we're like, oh, who has the worst ones? And usually there's, you know, usual suspects are usually with sort of the worst statistics, and that's the system we live in. It was designed that way. I take the pause to say that within the Black community, or let me reverse it, the community that has the highest suicide rates are Caucasian folks. And when we look at some of the other communities, there are some protective factors that kind of mitigate that outcome. So like in the Black community, we feel like suicide is not something we do. I'm not saying I feel that way. I'm not saying that it is that way. But it feels like something that's outside of the community. If you're doing that, why? Tough it out. Survive. You're not a slave. People had it worse. There's a different narrative within certain communities that impact how an individual might feel about taking their own life. So the ecological models are great for taking that kind of stuff into consideration. I think when you leave here, you might be inspired to figure out where you fall in the different categories of suicidal theories, to pick something and not pick something, but use it to understand how you're going to work with clients, right? When someone comes in front of you and you're trying to understand their experience, you want to think about, okay, where's going to be my target of intervention to help change the way they're experiencing their lives? You should really think about that. I feel that because I have maybe my bias of how I like these things, I feel real comfortable talking about suicide, you know? And remember I started, that's what I want people to walk away with. I think, like, I'm not going to say it's a crime, but I think it's pretty messed up that, like, in this world, like, if I have, like, a medical problem, it's okay to talk about it. Like, let's say diabetes, for example. If I'm, like, at lunch, and I'm like, no, I have diabetes. Someone's like, oh, you got to watch your sugar. Oh, you got to drink water. You know, they have like things going on. You can't eat that cake. People know like a couple things that you should do for diabetes, right? But if you're like, I'm feeling suicidal, people are not hitting you with the couple things you can do to not be suicidal, right? Exactly. They're out of there. And here you were having lunch with your best friend and you try and be real for a minute, right? So that sucks. Okay, so my like undercover agenda is let's have everyone get more comfortable with talking about this so we can know, you know, the couple things you might want to do about feeling suicidal is dismantle the environment that's maintaining it. All right, so we're going to get there. I think I'm doing good. Oh, I can't move past this. Sorry. Suicide is preventable. All right, that's important. And check me out. I didn't push past the slide. That's how important it is, because if we feel hopeless about it, imagine the person experiencing it. That comes off, all right? No one's like, I have the cure for cancer. No one's like, I got it. I know the secret. I'm going to stop cancer. But that oncology industry, booming, okay? Because people are trying, they believe there are things that are preventable, even though there are deaths, right? It's the same thing with suicide for real. It is preventable. There's a lot we can do, even though there are deaths, right? We don't have to be like dissuaded. Maybe we feel kind of powerless at times, but we have to know that it's preventable. We have to know there's something we can do about it. Man, we got to walk in that hard. You know, I don't know how else to tell you. It's that important. All right. Now, I said I had my bias. All right. Obviously, I was talking crap about the risk theories. I like the ones of the mind. All right. So I'm going to talk about the interpersonal theory of suicide. All right, it's by Tom Joyner. I was young and amazing. The year was 2017. The year was 2017. I was fortunate enough to go to a suicide prevention conference where he was explaining his theory. And he had just published it in 2015, so it was a big deal. But it was the first time that I heard a theory that was explaining what I was seeing. Right, because remember, some of my background was working with veterans, which that's another community that has a increased risk and rate of suicide. And there's a reason for that, you know, that I can go into, but that's not our topic. Our topic is just about this. But the theory itself talks about burdensomeness, hopelessness, belonging, having the capability for suicide. Those things all have to be present. All those things. All right. And so if any of those things are not present, then the group of people that believe this theory and have like entered research sort of off this branch believe you have, you know, better chances of stopping suicide. I agree. It helps explain why a lot of people are thinking about suicide but may not go on to attempt, which is the point of breaking down that question I talked about earlier. So, like, I might be thinking about suicide, but if I'm afraid of dying, I got a problem. You know what I mean? I might be thinking about suicide, but if I feel like I belong somewhere and I have responsibilities that that are too important for me to walk away from, then I have a problem. All right? Hopelessness is, did I put it up there? I sure did. Good. Hopelessness makes burdensomeness and belongingness worse. So it's like the more hopeless you feel about those two things, the worse it's going to be. All right. So you can have those two things. You can feel like a burden. Like, I don't know, imagine you're a combat vet and you're disabled and now you're depending on people that you don't feel like should have to give up their life to take care of you. That sucks, for real. You might feel like a burden, all right? Maybe also you don't feel like you can contribute in a meaningful way. You know, you don't feel like there's a group of people that get you, that understand you. Okay, so your belongingness is down too. If for some reason, you know, if for some reason you're not completely hopeless about that situation, that you think it can change, good. Then we're gonna mitigate risk right there. We can dream, we can create futures, we can create goals, we can work on overcoming those issues. But if someone is also hopeless, then we have a problem, and you should definitely consider that to be a target of like your intervention in this talking with them. The theory also talks about pathways to non-fatal attempts and obviously fatal attempts as well. That's, you know, something for you just to go into. I think a good theory explains all the outcomes. It doesn't explain everything, which is why suicide prevention has evolved on to some of the ecological theories, which I think is important. I think if you're going to be a strong consumer of this information, you might choose to grab things from a couple different theories and put together what works for you and your population of people. And so for me, population I care about is queer adults, right? So I'm taking from this idea, which I think I'm going to show you. Oh, let me see if I'm going to show you or not. No, I'm not going to show you. I'm going to talk to you about it. You know, oh yeah, there is a chart. I will show you. But okay, I take from these ideas and think about how can I help this individual, this queer adult, belong somewhere? How can I help them feel like they belong? Because, you know, if, for example, you used to live with your family because they decided to have you, you had no choice in the matter, you just came out into the world, and then they decide one day that you can't live there anymore, you know, not only do you not have anywhere to live, but you might start questioning your own worth. Like, even my parents put me out, you know, so they're the ones who are supposed to care about me the most, you know, so obviously, you know, someone could conclude that maybe you don't have any worth. Maybe you're worthless, you know. So I think belonging is important if that's something my client is struggling with, you know. So I think about those categories: burdensomeness, belongingness. We're going to talk about the capability for suicide, which kind of talks about can you do it, you know, and are you afraid of it and things like that. But we'll get into that. Now, I brought us this way through this art, like through this presentation, thinking about who we're talking about, who these people are, right? What happened, why the rates are high, and now how we understand suicide, right? And so I want to bring us back to those strengths that I initially put up here, because now we're gonna dig in them maybe a little deeper to apply them as a risk mitigation strategy for suicide prevention, right? So when I'm talking about incredibly special people that were historically respected as leaders, talk about belonging somewhere, right? Like that's amazing. If your community is depending on you for something, you're going to feel a part of that space. You know, that's going to be important to you. So we might want to go back to these ideas to think about how we're going to help someone address their suicidal urges, as I like to call them. Insightful folks, right? We talked about having access to both energies, or many energies, I should say. That's going to come up too, because I think when you are, I like to call it shape-shifting, but when you're navigating different spaces and sometimes you have to hide yourself, you do have to shape-shift a little bit. You know what I mean? Like if I'm, for example, I am a woman and I like to think, I don't know, y'all might feel differently, but I like to think I have some masculine energy, and when I'm in that space and I'm like maybe around people that are not as respectful or connected to feminine energy, the conversation is different, you know, and that sucks, but it gives me perspective and I can chime in differently. And also on the other side, when I'm with like maybe some of my individuals who have more feminine energy and there's a perspective that's missing, I can tap into that. I call that shape-shifting. You know, there might be some nice technical language for it, or, you know, it's out there. That's important for survival, okay? That's real important, and we're going to talk about that. We talked about being courageous, being creative. Being survivors is so important, and I think it'll be on the next slide for us to spend more time with. So we're going to spend a little bit more time here. Now, at the end of the day, our real goal, right? We want to help people connect with their strengths. That's what we want to do, to overcome the factors that are contributing to suicide, risk, urges, whatever it might be. That's what we want to do, okay? So connecting people with their strengths. Now, I looked at the queer community as a historical group, right? And came up with strengths that represent who they are. All of those things might not apply to every single queer person, if they even want to identify as queer. You know what I mean? You got to get to know the person. All right. So these are examples. Conceptually, I talked about this with the fire example that I didn't explain so well, all the elements. You don't want them all there. All right. So we're also thinking about removing those factors. So if you start on the far left side, and we're thinking about how do I deal with thwarted belongingness, someone who doesn't feel like they belong somewhere. How do I deal with that? Well, I might want to leverage maybe connection, maybe their sense of participating in community, so that I can help them feel like they belong somewhere. Let's give them a reason to do something. Volunteering is great. I mean, we can lean on the recovery community. When you think about the 12 steps, giving back is a part of that recovery. It's a part of that walk. Having purpose is really important. All right. When we think about burdensomeness and not being able to contribute, everybody can contribute, right? Everyone has a way of seeing the world that is unique. And because of that, they can help someone else. They might be the person that makes that particular existence visible for someone else. Like when I was growing up, obviously it was a couple years ago, but the world wasn't this queer, okay? It was not. Right now, it's almost like you got to come out as straight. Now, there's people that are not going to agree with that and don't have that experience, okay? And I respect everyone and shout out to them. But it was even worse when I was growing up, okay? I didn't see queer people. I barely got Ellen, okay? All right? So imagine, I mean, y'all probably can't imagine Philadelphia Tiara. I can't either, but I came to LA and it was a different world. Okay? And then there was this whole thing called West Hollywood. I hadn't even heard of like these kind of communities. So anyway, okay, being visible is important. That's what I'm talking about, right? And so everyone has something to contribute, even if it is just themselves. And so I think it's important to connect people with the idea that you have inherent value just for being human, just being here. You have value, and there's a way to connect that. So you might have, going to Pride. Another presentation. All right, coordinating or attending Pride is a way to give back and connect with the community. Okay, I made it queer specific, but it doesn't have to be that. Outside of my maybe queer identity, I also like basketball. So playing in a basketball league is something that, would make me feel like I belong somewhere. Maybe I can't play because I tore my Achilles, which happened. I have tears in both of them. It's very sad. But I can go and like grab the ball when it goes out of bounds. I can go and keep score. I can go and like help people with certain things. It makes me feel like I can contribute there. That's really important. All right. We talked about hopelessness and how it sort of makes the other things worse. But we also talked about creativity, right? And if you're creative, you can dream, all right? And if you can dream, you can have fantasies about a different reality. And if you're working with someone, I don't know, a counselor, a clinician of some sort, a curious friend, y'all can map that out together, okay? And that's really what it's about, is mapping people out of their current reality to another one. So lean into the creative side of folks, to sort of address the hopelessness if possible. Now, obviously, when you're feeling hopeless, you might not have access to that energy. It's hard to feel dreamy when you're also feeling depressed sometimes. We got to be mindful of that and work with what's showing up. All right. The capability for suicide, we're human beings. We're organisms, I was going to say we're just animals, and I was going to reference the Animal Planet, but I'm not going to do that, okay? Anyway, distractible tiara aside, our goal is to live, is really to survive. Organisms want to survive, okay? So, and we have. And so it's about leaning into that. So when I'm working with folks, for example, that are sharing maybe a lot of really bad things that happen to them, makes them feel like maybe untouchable now or unwanted now, I remind them, you're not the thing that happened to you. You're the person that survived it. So how did you survive it? Let's talk about what happened. Oh, you became a poet. Great. Let's talk about poetry. Let's go down that path. And so now, we go back to like the first or third slide. We talked about defining ourselves, right? And we talked about not identifying with, maybe the way other people are seeing us. This is part of that process. Remind people that they survived things already, right? And they still can. So you connect there and just see where that goes, right? The goal there obviously is to reduce their suicidal urges. I put lethal means up here because I feel like maybe low-key I could lose my license if I didn't. But it's also just that important, all right? I did mention, when you take someone's preferred method away, their risk of suicide goes down. That's real. That there's research on that. So we do that, all right? I talked about time between impulse and action. That's real, right? Because just period, we want to do that. But when you're having those lethal means discussions, they got to be real to the person. If I want to die by hanging myself, then let's talk about the ropes I have access to. Let's talk about if I go to the park by myself or with a friend. Let's talk about those things. That's an important part of the discussion. I think we get nervous as clinicians having that part of the discussion because we're talking about the plan with them. I've heard people tell me, well, I don't want to give them the idea. Never have I ever, well, never mind, let me not say that. Let me not say that. You're not going to make someone want to kill themselves if they didn't already have a thought about it. Okay, talking about it is not going to make it more real or give them the idea. Okay, so I had an analogy I would do when we're not recording maybe, but just know that and lean into that conversation because reducing lethal means is really, really important. All right, so with that, I want to see what you guys want to talk about, right? So that's what I wanted to present to you guys about how to manage suicide within the LGBTQ community, leveraging their strengths, and getting to a point where you feel more comfortable talking about suicide risk and urges. Where are you guys at? What do you think? Thank you.
I always do this. Kimberly, alcoholic. Grateful to be here.
Grateful to have you. Grateful to have you.
My question, yes, I understand the 988 number, but I have somebody in my direct community, 17-year-old, that survived her attempt. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And she is looking to help get her connected with like someone of her mindset so that she can understand and talk with like-minded people of the rainbow community.
I love it. You're talking about building community. I'm loving this already. Keep going.
And how can I help connect her with a like-minded community of the rainbow gender, like the rainbow fluidity, so that she can have someone else help her, like maybe be a little more relatable, a little more attainable, like to the conversations.
Locating the resources, folks are on the struggle bus with that. Understood. It's hard, especially when people might not be talking about it as openly as they want to. I think it's like being committed to anything. If you lift up one rock and it's not there, you keep looking, right? So when I tell people, where do you start? Most communities have like a gay and lesbian center of some sort. It's a good place to start. They're not going to have everything, but they're going to have some real passionate people up in there that are willing to talk to you about whatever they don't have, so I'm like, that's a good place to start. Now we have crisis and hotlines that are required to give you referrals to local resources. You can start with that, right? Because then you'll at least know a direction, but it's like going to the dentist. All right, I go to the dentist. I don't like the guy, really hurt my gums. I'm not going to not clean my teeth for the rest of my life. Okay, I'm going to find another dentist. Okay, so if you go to a support group that you're not rocking with for whatever reason, you have the right to find another one and keep looking. And that has to be the commitment. You know what I mean? I think surviving an attempt is a hard situation. It also, when I was talking about the capability for suicide, and I earlier I talked a little bit about experiences. If you have a history of attempt, that definitely puts you at higher risk moving forward, right? You've already you crossed the line about wanting to live and being okay with death. So those are individuals we really want to put our arms around. And I think you just partner with them. And I've done that. I'll say, look, I don't know how to figure this out, but I'm going to work with you. And I'll give you an example. I mentioned earlier that I was covering pretty big territory out in the Pacific. I had, it was a crisis line call, which I'm in Hawaii. This individual was in Guam, and they called a hotline that was located in upstate New York. Now, there's lots of time differences to worry about, but I got the call, and I called the girlfriend back because she had witnessed her boyfriend shoot himself. I was trying to think about a nice way to say it, but she witnessed that, and they didn't really know what to do. He was in the hospital at that point, but there are not a lot of services, not a lot of trauma services on Guam. And I said, look, I never had this situation. I don't know how to deal with this, but I'll figure this out with you. And here's my number that you can call. We have a work cell phone. Here's my number you can call. And every time I find out an update, I'm going to be with you. So we were in it together, and it was hard for me. I was a lot of pressure, right? Because you don't want to over-promise things at all. You really don't. But you can say, I'm going to figure it out with you, And I was able to get that person actually flown out to UCLA. They had to get reconstructive surgery. And there was a lot of authorizations and, coverage and all this stuff. It's a lot to deal with when it's your boyfriend that just hurt himself. But I'm a social worker, right? And I'm showing up in this work to do this with you. So I will, right? And I think, so that's what you do. You partner, you commit to turning over all the rocks, and you let folks know it's real. You might not like what you find the first time. You keep looking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
More of a comment
I think you're supposed to be on the mic.
question. I think one of the coolest things that you said was when you were talking about how we all have multiple layers to who we are as people.
Yeah.
It really brought an awareness to kind of my existence as a gay man.
Yeah.
Who was bullied, who, suffers from internalized homophobia. And when you talked about all of these things, it was really cool how you put I think you said cards, the cards that each person has or something. Mm-hmm. I loved it. I thought it was a really great
I'm glad.
analogy. And I think it really kind of helped me understand that just because people are under the queer umbrella doesn't mean that that each person from that community
Exactly.
is dealing with something different.
Exactly. They're going to have different experiences. I was going to say shout out to Kimberly Crenshaw. We owe it to her. Intersectionality is a really powerful concept, and it's beyond our community in this topic today. But I'm really glad it was something new for you today, and I think we should all be in touch with it, regardless of what we do or how we do. Even at work, one of the things I used to do is I used to train leaders, and even just understanding your workforce, that this is a new person, they're new to the field, and they're from out of state. That's different than just having a seasoned new employee. You're going to deal with these people differently. So just it's an amazing concept, and shout out to Kimberly Crenshaw. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you guys. All right. I think I'm out of here. Oh, that's how you contact me.